Joining me now to answer that question, assistant editor at Red Alert Politics, Siraj Hashmi, and president of the National Action Network in San Diego, the Reverend Shane Harris. Siraj, the Reverend Shane, thanks for being here, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right, Siraj, I want to start with you for this question of the day. Like I said, this is courtesy of Andrew Sullivan's piece in New York Magazine. Worth a read. Very interesting. Very good discussion starter, I think. But if we're such a racist nation, Siraj, why have Asian Americans and Jewish Americans been so successful in modern America?
Liz, that's a very good question. I've had to wrestle with this one all afternoon after reading that story. And really, I think one word comes down to it, and that's opportunity. I think if you're looking at the opportunities that were presented to Jewish Americans and Asian Americans, I think they're probably given the benefit of having a little bit more opportunity than, say, maybe African Americans or Latino Americans. But that's not to say that people in all of these different racial and ethnic groups aren't given similar opportunities. I think the opportunities that they were presented don't always offer higher or upward mobility to a better economic situation. And that could be made the case for not only just African Americans, but white Americans as well.
Right, and Shane, let me turn to you. I mean, that's the why question. Why have those minorities been so successful? Let me ask you the how question. How have they done that? If there is such racial discrimination institutionally in our country, I think that's the question that we wrestle with in our nation, whether that exists or whether it's individual racism. How have they been so successful?
Well, first of all, let me say this. You can have different opinions, but you can't have different facts. The fact is that the Holocaust that Jews went through, and I certainly want to say this, I salute all minorities who have gone through struggles and who have found their own way and built their own path. A lot of respect goes out to everyone who has done that and taken advantage of opportunity. But the Holocaust did not lower Jews' status in America, and it did not happen in America. So when you talk about this whole idea of how did they get through versus how did African Americans and other minorities, how come they haven't gone through? You have to really deal with the facts. The facts are that Jews and Asians have not really had to go through in this country the lowering of status. Also, you have to deal with the immigrant.
Wait a second. Let me interrupt you there, because I agree with you. We're not really dealing with opinion here. We're dealing with fact. And the fact of the matter is, Asian Americans have had an absolutely awful history in our country. In fact, Asians were banned from immigrating to the United States in 1924.
Yeah,
I mean, Japanese American citizens of our country, not immigrants. Wait a second. Let me finish this. They were put in internment camps during World War II. I mean, they were prohibited from employment in the West. When the West was being explored in our country, Asian Americans were routinely lynched. I mean, I don't think it's quite fair to say that they haven't experienced the same history of racism in our country in the past.
But there's a difference between an immigrant and a slave. An immigrant is coming to the country that stole the slaves. You're dealing with two different dynamics, and to say that we're surprised that the country is treating Asians and maybe potentially some Jews, yes, there's disparity there, but you have to deal with the reality that African Americans were stolen from their homeland, brought over here to this land. Many of them did not want to be here nor make a way here. Many of them wanted to go back to their homeland. They were stolen from their land. So you have to deal with the immigrant versus the slave concept in order to get down to the reality of this. And I think that's what I'm trying to say. How do you have the same perspective for a slave that you have for an immigrant? You're dealing with two different angles and two different perspectives, and you just know.
And Siraj, I mean, I don't think anybody's arguing the atrocity that was slavery. I don't think anyone is arguing. I hope that's not what you're doing either, Reverend Shane. I don't think anyone's arguing the terrible racist history that Asian Americans have had to endure in our country either, or Jewish Americans. I don't know if that differentiation is valid. And Siraj, I want you to speak to that. I mean, there's a difference between having experienced something terrible and then being able to take advantage of opportunity. And I think that's where the disparity really lies.
In a way, yes. I mean, I will not. I mean, there's no making up for slavery in any certain way. I mean, it's the struggle that African Americans had to go through slavery, Jim Crow, the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, no one's taken that part away from them. I mean, it is sad that the racism that's been directed towards African Americans continues and persists today. And there's Muslims are getting it right now. Jews are getting it in certain ways. But at this time, right now, what are you going to do about it? You as an individual. I'm not asking, you yourself,
Right.
Shane and Liz. I'm saying, what is it that you are going to do about it? Are you going to make a difference in your society by trying to find the best economic window for you and uplifting your community, or are you going to wallow in the misery of your ancestors and try to hone in on making it the fault of other people rather than putting the onus on yourself?
But how do you level? What I'm dealing with is this. I'm dealing with the concept of leveling the playing field. Last week I was here and I said, you're not dealing with equality, you're dealing with equity, which equals the playing field. African Americans, it's known fact and it's a proven fact, the slavery and the downtrodden aspect that African Americans have gone and the disparities in this country have been one of the only races that have not been given reparations. I mean, how do you have this conversation about how did one do better than the other? First of all, that is a racist comment in itself, because you're dealing with two different people with two different experiences in this country that have had two different challenges, and you cannot equal them together because they have not had the same path. So you're dealing with equity. Who and what is the scale depicted upon? And that is why Asian Americans and Jews who have come over with the money and come over with the experience are just setting up their grounding because they're given economic opportunity in a country that is paying them back, and in the Indian community as well. Our Native American community is getting paid back. But the African American community is still one of the only races in this country that has not got reparations, that has not been given opportunity as much as others have. So that's what I'm saying. We cannot have different opinions when we have different facts. We're dealing with two different people with two different perspectives,
Right,
with two different backgrounds.
it was never intended to be a direct comparison like that. It was meant to be a thought experiment in the sense that, like I said, to challenge the narrative that Democrats give us that our nation inherently is a racist nation, that our nation inherently is a white supremacist nation. And no one is arguing the terrible history that America has had. I mean, all the three of us sitting here of the millennial generation, fortunately, did not have to deal with any of the things that we are talking about. And we are very fortunate. Our generation perhaps is one of the first. That doesn't erase the terrible history, but it does bring up the point that I think that Siraj made. And Siraj, you can go further on this point. The mindset challenging this narrative that Democrats give us that our nation is still just has the underpinning of racism. Is there at some point a mindset, a victimized mindset versus taking an opportunities mindset that makes a difference in the success of different minority groups?
In a sense, I mean, full disclosure, I was born and raised Muslim. I'm still practice Islam today. And so a lot of Muslims and family members and friends that in the Muslim community that I know, they kind of hone in on this victimhood message, the identity politics. And, sometimes that works in certain instances when you're actually getting discriminated against. And, I'm not going to deny that there has been a rise of anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States. But at the same time, I'm not seeing it happen left and right around me. So if I am in a position where I am not seeing it happening all around me, and a lot of it,
because many of our African American brothers and sisters are getting killed in the streets by police, and nobody's doing anything about it. The voting rights issue is still a very big disparity. So to say I don't see a problem with it, I don't know, if it's a problem for my community, even in the Muslim community.
I'm not saying that there's no problem.
What's happening to your brothers and sisters is wrong and should not be done in a country that says home of the free.
And Siraj, go ahead and speak to this, Siraj.
Well, what I was just going to say is that, the best thing that I can do in my own power is to elevate my own platform so that I have a voice. So right now, as a journalist, that is the best outlet that I have. Right. And so if I'm able to speak to an audience who can actually hear my thoughts and opinions, having them understand where I'm coming from may give them some sort of empathy or sympathy to what I went through or what my friends or family members who are Muslim went through. And, it works that way. Sometimes you can't just yell in their face about wanting to demand equality. Sometimes you have to speak to them softly and in their language so that they start to understand what you're saying and what causes you're actually advocating for.
I agree.
Right, and on that note, I think that's a good note to end it on, because mostly because we're out of time, but also because I think that's where the three of us actually find common ground. I mean, African American, Muslim, women, those are three kind of target groups right now in America, but that's where we all agree. You know, we speak from our own platforms. We try to create empathy, compassion, and have the conversation. Gentlemen, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
All right.